Hi, and welcome back to Can You Relate? Thinking with Keywords for Culture. Today's episode is about participatory engagement and reciprocity in both local and global contexts.
Hello, my name is Ella.
My name is Meredith, and today we'll be discussing the importance of participatory engagement and reciprocity in several contexts, including study abroad as well as research and community engagement both globally and locally.
First, let's start with participatory engagement. Meredith, can you tell me what exactly does participatory engagement mean?
Participatory engagement refers to active participation that encourages, requires, and sparks engagement in an activity with a person or within. Engagement is a power or willingness to participate actively in opportunities. This means entering the opportunity with an eagerness to engage and learn, and leaving the opportunity with a greater sense of appreciation and understanding.
That is so interesting. Meredith, could you break this idea down a little further for us and explain how this relates to studying and traveling and spending time abroad?
Absolutely. When entering a country, the customs, traditions, and ways of life in that new culture may be starkly different from what you're accustomed to. When I first arrived in Tanzania for my summer internship 2 summers ago, I immediately felt out of place. The small village of Usa River that I would call home for the next 2 months, which was lined with street vendors, chaotic bus stops, and crowded with people who looked, spoke, and interacted differently than me, was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Initially, I questioned why I chose to come to Tanzania and crave the comfort of my home in Mississippi. As fearful as I was for this new experience, I had made a commitment to myself that I would spend the next 10 weeks fully immersing myself in this new culture, knowing that engaging and interacting with locals, creating connections with my host family, and fully committing myself to my work at my internship at an elementary school would allow me to gain a greater understanding of Tanzanian culture.
That's so awesome and such an important thing to be aware of when you're abroad. So what happened next, and tell me more about your experience in Tanzania.
Yes, so instead of retreating to my room when I got homesick each night after coming back from work, I would go to the kitchen where I was staying with my host family and have conversations with my host family, learning about their experiences in Tanzania and sharing stories about our different cultures. I would shop at local stores and try to speak Swahili, knowing that the person working would teach me more about the language than my iPhone dictionary could. I learned how to take the Dala Dala, which is the community bus, which was often crowded with people and sometimes even chickens and other animals, to work every day and would have conversations with the people sitting next to me. Through actively engaging and making the choice to participate in activities that would encourage me to interact with others, I developed a strong connection and relationship with this community and culture.
That sounds like such an incredible experience, and it really does seem like you made the most of your time in Tanzania. But were there ever times where you felt maybe less motivated to engage and interact on such a personal level? And if so, which I'm assuming there were because it can be sometimes a little tough, what would you do during those moments to really engage in that participatory engagement?
Yes, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, living and interacting in a new place and new culture can be tiring, and however, it is absolutely worth it. It's important to recognize that there will be tough days, and during these moments, you may need to call a friend from home, talk to your family, or maybe watch a TV show that reminds you of home and makes you feel comfortable. Finding the balance between immersing yourself in a new culture while also taking care of yourself both mentally and emotionally is extremely important. Don't get discouraged when you have tough, hard, or long days, but remember that these tough days add to your experiences and personal growth.
That is so encouraging and such an important thing to keep in mind, that it may not always be easy and that it's definitely okay to have little things that remind you of home, but it's definitely so encouraging and so great for the experience overall and for personal growth to really put yourself out there when you can. I also wanted to mention that participatory engagement is amazing for an abroad level, but it also can be seen at a local level as well. Dr. Handelsman, who is an anthropology professor here at Wofford, is going to be joining us today as a special guest. She is currently my professor in ethnography, which is her Anthropology 300 class, and we do a lot of work with the Spartanburg community and doing research with different organizations in the Spartanburg community in that course. And so she has a lot of knowledge and experience working with our local community and with what local participatory engagement looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to her to share a personal story about what local participatory engagement has looked like for her and share a little bit about her experience.
Hello, Dr. Handelsman. Welcome to our podcast. We're really glad to have you on today.
Hi, Ella and Meredith. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. We're so glad that you can chat with us. So we have a couple questions prepared for you just in relation to the theme that we've been talking about of reciprocity and participatory engagement. So for starters, can you just share with us what reciprocity and participatory engagement mean to you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I'm an anthropologist and a researcher, and I think of reciprocity and participatory engagement within the realm of research. And to me, it really means designing and executing projects collaboratively. So working with the communities that you're interested in learning more about, and really kind of working against that top-down model that has always kind of attached itself to research, in which a researcher is determining the what, the why, but really challenging that and making it a more horizontal relationship and partnership, so that you're engaging in work that is relevant and meaningful to everyone.
Absolutely. That's a really great way to put kind of what we've been chatting about in the first part of the podcast. So that's awesome. Could you tell us a story or personal experience that you have had? I know you've done a ton of field work in all sorts of different areas, and we would love to hear a story about reciprocity or participatory engagement from your own personal experience.
Yeah, of course. So a story that I often tell my introductory students in anthropology is about one of my first, or probably my first, research experience in Guayaquil in Ecuador. And this is when I was an undergraduate. So I got a grant right before my senior year at Northwestern to do a research project on hip hop in Guayaquil. And I was going to use this for my senior thesis, or I did use this for my senior thesis. And I had read an article about hip hop as protest and as a social movement in Guayaquil, and it was really interesting. So I wrote a proposal, I got a grant, and I went to Ecuador, which is where my family's from. So I was also going to Ecuador that summer for my grandfather's 80th birthday, and it was a very exciting time. And I'd come back from being abroad, so I studied abroad in Mexico that semester, and I was feeling very confident. So I felt, like I've had this experience now living in Latin America on my own. I'm going to Ecuador, which I've been going there my whole life. So I was just very confident going into my first interview with a hip hop group. So I connected with a nonprofit organization and met someone there who told me that he could introduce me to a rapper and his group. So I went with him, and I had my tape recorder and my notebook, and I went to a barber shop to conduct this interview. And so I was in a part of the city that I hadn't known before, and I was very excited, just taking everything in. And when I got there, I introduced myself to the lead person from the group, and he was still cutting someone's hair. And he wasn't overly friendly the way that I was, I guess. Didn't seem as excited about the interview as I was. So I waited for him to cut that person's hair. Another person came in, so I was waiting for a while. And there were a lot of people there, and no one seemed that open about making conversation with me. So I think that I really kind of just stood out. Like, people knew that I was showing up there, that I was going to show up there. But finally, he finished cutting hair, and we sat down, and I introduced myself. I said, oh, thanks for having me. I am really excited. I just want to ask you all some questions about hip hop. And before I could keep going, he stopped and he said, well, what do you know about hip hop? And I said, well, I read an article that there's, a hip hop scene here in Guayaquil, and I just wanted to learn more about it. And he said, well, we don't know that. So I told him about the article. He said, well, we've never heard of that person who wrote the article. So what kind of hip hop music do you like? And I said, well, I don't really listen that much to hip hop. I really like folk music, and I like to sing, and I play the guitar. And so I started naming these artists that nobody really seemed to know. And so he said, okay, well, sing for us. And I said, well, I don't. So at this point, I'm very nervous. And I said, well, I usually don't sing without my guitar. And he said, okay, we'll get you a guitar. So he sent someone to go get me a guitar. It was a really big group of people. There was their entourage. And so I sat there, and it wasn't, I just knew it wasn't a space at this point where we were going to make small talk. So it was just kind of sitting in silence, waiting for the guitar and thinking about what song I was going to sing. So they brought the guitar, and I made it through. I sang The House of the Rising Sun, and I made it through, and I was nervous, but then the nerves kind of went away by the end of it. And when I finished, he said, okay, now what do you want to know? Mm-hmm. And we started the conversation, and it ended up being this really long conversation interview. I learned a lot. I ended up being pretty well connected with him and some of the people from his group for the rest of that year and the following year when I went back to live there for a longer research period. But it was that moment where I don't think that I processed all of that at the time, but it really highlighted the verticality inherent in research. And people pushing against that, right? So not wanting to be your objects of study, which you can just kind of come in and say, hey, I'm going to ask you these questions. And that experience really kind of framed my approach as I continued, learning and conducting research in Ecuador and other places as well, of that, reciprocal participatory model in which you are inviting people and partnering with people to be a part of the learning process, and not kind of you going in and saying, this is how it's going to be done. And the storytelling piece, which is so central to ethnographic research and really developing relationships, is so important. And I think a lot of times as a researcher, expecting people to share stories of theirs, a lot of times very personal stories of theirs. And I think, in this moment, I really learned the importance of you being vulnerable as well. So you're kind of expecting people to be vulnerable, but you need to open up too. And I was definitely made very vulnerable in that moment of performing for a bunch of people I'd never met before. And so that's really a moment that I'll always remember, and that was really kind of critical to me and my own formation as a researcher, and just my own philosophies about leveling the playing field and working in partnership with people as much as possible in designing projects, and being willing to share my stories and my experiences, and not just going in and kind of getting all the information from others.
Absolutely. That connects so much to what we've been talking about and some of the stories that we've shared, just in relation to making it more than just kind of someone coming in or you coming in and saying, here's what I know and this is what I can do. It's more of a relationship and a partnership, which is absolutely so important. So thank you for sharing that story with us. I guess now kind of connecting it to the local level and thinking about reciprocity and participatory engagement in a very local work context. Could you kind of speak on that and tell us what you've learned about
this subject of reciprocity through your work with the Wofford and Spartanburg community. I know we do a lot of that in the class that I'm in with you and with other classes that you teach, and so I'd love to kind of hear from you about the local side of reciprocity in the United States and specifically Spartanburg.
Yeah, definitely. Well, all of these philosophies that make up reciprocity and participatory research are ones that I employ in my own classes. So the course that you're in right now, ethnography, I think the research projects that you're working on are an example of that. So the students in ethnography are, doing their own ethnographic research projects in partnership with community organizations. So the way I structured that class this year was, contacting different community partners who I've been working with the last few years to see, especially during COVID times when just everything is more challenging for everyone, to see if there were any research needs that they might have that we could work with them on. And I got, a lot of people interested in, getting that support from Wofford students. So students like you are working with the Hub City Farmers Market. Other students are working with the Cleveland Academy of Leadership. Others are working with the Spartanburg Food Coalition. And others are working with the Truth and Racial Healing Transformation Working Group. So I think that type of experiential learning model in our ethnography course is kind of getting all of the students on board in terms of learning how to do research in partnership with organizations and doing research that organizations in the community care about. So in the past, a lot of the projects were very much focused on campus that students would do because students just kind of develop projects independently, which is also, there are important skills that they're getting from there. But I felt like, having a conversation of which dorm is better, to me at least, it didn't seem like the learning outcomes were as meaningful there as they are when students are going, beyond Wofford's campus to do projects. And additionally, I teach a community sustainability seminar, which is a year-long course that you're going to be in next year, Ella.
Yes.
And students in that course just learn as much as possible during the first few weeks from Wofford community leaders, residents, going on kind of walking tours with people from the neighborhoods to, hear stories, share stories. And from there, students working as volunteers. So I found that a lot of participant observation, which is one of the central methods of ethnographic research, starts with volunteering. So the volunteering that we do involves a lot of reflection, which I think is really important. So that reflection piece to, make the most out of the volunteering experience. And so to kind of think critically about what you're learning, thinking about your own positionality, thinking comparatively too, because students are working in a bunch of different organizations in the city to see, how are these different organizations addressing societal needs, societal interests, how are they kind of taking into account the assets of a community. So a lot of times in doing community-based work, I think one of the errors is when projects are approached with strictly an attitude of help, because that automatically kind of positions communities that you're going to work with as being communities in need of, as opposed to communities who, they have a lot that's going on that's positive, a lot of people in the community who are, organizing each other, themselves, making changes in their community. Sometimes, there's that need for partnership, right, to make certain changes happen. But I think that the asset piece is one that we really emphasize in the course as well. And so just across the year, students are building those relationships, getting to know about the community, and ultimately partnering with an organization or with an initiative to work on a collaborative project for the good of the Spartanburg community.
I'm very excited to take that course. So that's awesome to hear more about. And for whoever's listening to this podcast to kind of learn more about the local side of participatory engagement, I think is really awesome. And I love that you highlighted relationship over kind of just coming in for help purposes. So
Right.
Thank you so much for chatting with us. I know that whoever ends up listening to our podcast is going to learn a lot from your stories and the work that you've done. So thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now let's talk about reciprocity. Ella, what exactly is reciprocity and how does it relate to participatory engagement?
That's a great question, Meredith. Reciprocity is the practice of exchanging things with others for mutual benefit. This can be an exchange of physical items, but more so in this case, like we're exploring in the podcast today, it can also be an exchange of ideas, morals, and ideals. This could look like sharing stories about the United States with a new local friend you have made in Italy and walking away from that conversation with a greater understanding of Italian culture. Or it could also look like working with a local organization and leaving the work that you do, knowing that you provided your own hard work and help, but that the experience also taught you more about the people and community that you worked with and the experiences that they have. However this may look, the main idea is that whatever you give, you are also receiving something and vice versa.
That's super helpful to know. This actually reminds me of my experience working at Silverleaf Academy, the pre-primary and primary school that I interned with while in Tanzania. I had the opportunity to teach weekly English lessons with the school teachers whose native language is Swahili. At first, I tried teaching the English lessons by presenting English words and asking the teachers to tell me what these words meant or how they could use them in a sentence. I soon realized that the teachers didn't feel engaged or encouraged to learn, since it felt like I was simply talking at them. I decided to take a step back and figure out how I can make the class more interactive and realize that the best way for them to learn would be for us to learn together. I would present different topics each week, such as food, different places to visit, or recent news. I would ask for the teachers to tell me in English about their favorite Tanzanian food, their favorite places to visit in Usa River, and things that were happening in Tanzania. I was then able to help them communicate this in English while also learning more about Tanzanian culture. This would also create a space for the teachers to ask me about my favorite foods and places in Tanzania, and they would teach me these words in Swahili. Over the course of several weeks, we all felt a sense of connection between one another, and we had a greater understanding of one another's cultures and languages.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Meredith. That's absolutely incredible and such a great example of what reciprocity looks like abroad. And it also shows that reciprocity can come in so many forms. As long as you are willing to step out of your comfort zone and engage with others and in different activities, as we saw through your amazing story, you will definitely gain something as well as share something with the community you're working with.
Absolutely. Both participatory engagement and reciprocity are two very important terms and ideas to keep in mind as you prepare to go abroad. But they're also two important terms to keep in mind when you're engaging in conversations, activities, and work locally. Entering into new environments can be challenging, and you may be a little nervous about starting an experience you've never had before. But if you go into each new opportunity with the willingness and eagerness to learn and grow, then you will come out with new perspectives and an understanding of yourself and others.
Absolutely. That sums it up so perfectly, Meredith. So thank you all for taking the time to listen to our podcast today on participatory engagement and reciprocity. And we hope that as you go throughout your day or the rest of your week, you can kind of take one of the challenges we're about to give you as you think about what you learned in this podcast. So potentially, as you reflect, think about an experience that you've had with community engagement, either abroad or locally, wherever you are, and reflect on what you learned in this podcast and how that relates to your previous experience. And then another way that you can think about what we've talked about in our podcast today is how you can show an eagerness to engage and learn even within your local or even college campus community. So who can you reach out to this week and engage in a conversation with and really get to know more and experience that reciprocity and engagement that we've talked about, even just in a very, very local level. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.